So Moon Knight dropped last week Wednesday, and since all of you asked, I'm gonna talk about it. I'll give a basic summary of the show, my thoughts on it, and what I'm excited for and looking forward to. The show opens with this edgelord, our main villain, Arthur Harrows, cracking open a cold one, and then he breaks that shit and then he puts it in his shoes. After that, we get our obligatory 15-second MCU intro, and then we're introduced to our main character, Stephen Grant. We quickly discover that he's kinda on some weird shit. He has sand around his bed and he sleeps with his ankle chained to his bed, and he has tape on his doorway. It becomes clear that Stephen gets up to some wild shit while he's sleeping. One introduction to Stephen's miserable life later, we're at his workplace, where a lady comes up to him and starts flirting with him. She explains that she's excited for their date that they're gonna have later in the week, and then Stephen just hits her with the "I don't even know who you are." Fast forward through more stuff about his job and how miserable it is, and he's outside talking to a statue. It's a nice scene that emphasizes how lonely Stephen really is, and I think it's a pretty good touch. After that, Stephen goes home and then screws with a Rubik's Cube until he falls asleep. But upon his awakening, we can see he's in a grass field and his jaw's just been turned into Tyler Posey. He goofs around for a bit and then he hears a voice in his head talking to him. It's all quickly cut off by some guys who start shooting at him. Stephen books it into a nearby town and ends up witnessing this weird shit right here. Before he gets spotted by the edgelord from the opening, who demands that he gives him back the scarab. Stephen is completely compliant in his requests, but his body says nah, and starts moving on its own. So then Ethan Hawke, who's getting sick of his shit, is just like,
I've had a good chuckle over that one. I'm coming after you.
And then this happens.
No, the idiot's back.
What then ensues is a pretty fun car chase scene, which is subsequently ended by these two guys getting RKO'd by a bunch of falling logs.
Fatality.
And then, just like that, Stephen wakes up in his bed. But he quickly notices that a number of things are off. His previously one-finned goldfish now has two fins. Alarmed and confused by this, he runs down to the pet store and starts yelling at the shop owner in British. The store owner tells him that he was here yesterday and that he should just piss off now. Was it really all a dream? Stephen is now super confused by everything, but then remembers his date. He rushes to the venue, but after waiting for a little bit, he calls her. After that, she tells him that he stood her up a couple of days ago, and then she dumps him. After realizing that it's not Friday and something is going on, Stephen rushes home. Confused and lonely, Stephen decides to screw around in his house a little bit more, and then he finds a phone in a wall. There's a ton of missed calls on the phone from a lady, so Stephen calls her back, and then when she picks up the phone, she mistakes him for somebody else.
Why did you call me Mark?
Mark!
Stephen hears a voice talking to him. Confused, he gets mad and starts yelling all over his house. Then, for some mysterious reason, the walls in Stephen's apartment start shaking. And Stephen, being the clever guy that he is, does the only logical thing to do in a potential earthquake. He gets in an elevator, where he's immediately jump scared, but it turns out it's just a friendly old lady. Or is it? It doesn't matter, because Stephen is immediately teleported into the next day and he's somehow on the bus on the way to work. When he gets to work, he sees this guy, and with his supreme detective skills, he deduces that he's real. The guy comes up to him and talks to him for a bit, and then Stephen runs away. Later that day, Stephen is chilling at work when he gets attacked by this.
What the hell? Oh my God, no way.
It chases him down into a bathroom where Stephen's other personality, Mark, talks to him. Mark tries to convince Stephen to hand over his body to him. Stephen complies, and then we finally get this scene. Now that it's been summarized, we have a basic idea of episode uno. Here are my thoughts. I really like this show so far. To start off with the look of the show. It isn't as visually polarizing as something as the 2022 Batman, but it's also not as bland as most MCU movies that just look like commercials. In my opinion, the visuals hit a perfect sweet spot in between super artistic and just casual stuff. It just works. I'd compare it to something like The Dark Knight, where most shots aren't super dynamic with the lighting, but they're also generally nice to look at and you could probably put it as a screensaver or something. Next up, the music. I do really like the way they've used music in the show. To preface, the show goes from artists like Bob Dylan to Jay-Z, and that's just in the first episode. And for some reason, they just really work in their own respective scenes. I enjoyed both of these scenes. The first scene where Steven is introduced and is set to a man without love works really well. The song isn't dreary, but as the camera pans on and we get an introduction to Steven's life, I can still tell that Steven is a pretty lonely person. And again, this song just works. And better yet, they were playing this song throughout the entirety of the MCU intro, and just stuff like that I just like. It's a nice break from the usual stuff, and it also just feels creative. Now, moving on to characters. We really only get extensive scenes with Steven and the main villain, so there's not a whole lot to dive into, but I'll still talk about it. I think so far Arthur Harrow as a villain is alright. He's fairly interesting. I think the opening scene with him putting glass in his shoes was intriguing. The creepy shit he was doing in the village was cool, and in general he does play a pretty unnerving character on screen. He's creepy without overdoing it too much. He's not super creepy either, but again, it is only the first episode and I'd say it made a pretty okay first impression. Now, as far as Steven Grant, I'd say I really enjoy watching him on screen. See, something I find annoying about most MCU characters is the way they really overdo the amount of jokes that the main characters have to spout out every 5 seconds. Now, Steven Grant is also pretty damn goofy most of the episode, but in here, it actually does work. It's made pretty clear from the first couple of minutes that Steven is a certified loser. He's awkward, he's not confident, he gets picked on at work, and his only friends that we've seen are his mom and this statue. So when I see him doing something weird in a social situation that's played off for laughs, I can actually imagine that happening. But see, when you have 6'12" Mr. Bitches doing the exact same goofy shit, man, it's just forced and kinda cringe and just in general makes me roll my eyes. I think Steven is a very relatable character to a lot of people, and I think putting the story in a point of view from somebody like that for once is a pretty bold move, and I think it generally does work. You really can empathize with him, and the goofball stuff just makes him likable and not annoying, in my opinion only. The way Mark is as a character just makes me excited for where they'll go with him from now on. You know, how he reacts to these situations, how he deals with them, how he feels about multiple personalities being in his body, and not just multiple personalities, but ones that constantly thrust him into super dangerous situations on a daily or weekly basis, or I don't know, depends on where they'll go with the show. Now, moving on to the story of the whole thing, I think it did a really good job for a first episode. I genuinely enjoyed this first episode more than any of the first episodes I've enjoyed from these newer Marvel TV shows so far. It creates so many interesting questions and sets up just enough so that you're not totally in the dark. It leaves a lot of key information out, but it also keeps enough in so that you're kind of in the loop. You don't know exactly what's going on with Steven, but you get the basic idea. There's obviously more than one person in your head, but it keeps you asking questions. Who's Mark? Why is Steven doing these things? How did he get this way? Who's the other voice in Steven's head? Why are there 3 Stevens in the MCU now? I feel like it set up just enough questions, and I'll definitely keep watching. I also like how unique and separate this feels from all the other things. To start off with, it has roughly no tie-ins with any other MCU project, so it feels grounded. You know, it does remind me of Daredevil back in the day, in the sense that it feels separate, but also the tone is much more mature. Now, moving on to what I'm looking forward to. Now, I find the mystery in this show very, very intriguing, and I'm looking forward to figuring out or discovering, what's going on. Now, as far as the show's role in the grander scheme of the MCU, I'm not sure where they're gonna take Moon Knight, but personally I'm not frothing at the mouth over the possibility of him having a crossover with another character. It'd be interesting to see him in a future movie at some point, but for now, I like how self-contained the show is. All in all, I'd give the show a good 8 out of 10 so far. And yeah, that was it. Subscribe if you support black businesses. My name is Sunny the Mailman, and I will see you in the next one.
My vengeance.